Hey everybody, so we got the big news yesterday. Hockey is back. The NHL and the NHL players have both agreed to their 2021 return to play plan, and that means that January 13th, this NHL season will begin, and we've got a ton of new information out about what this new season is going to look like, and I'm going to be going over all of that in this video. I haven't done any return to play video stuff yet, and people have been asking why. Because I was waiting for it to be official. There were a lot of reports out. There was a lot of talk about 56 games in January 13th and all these reports, but none of it was official until it was voted on and agreed to by both the league and the players, and that happened yesterday. So we are officially back, and the 2021 season is officially good to go. There's still some questions left unanswered, and those we're going to have to find out over the next week or so as to what the answers to those questions are going to be. But the framework is in place, the season is good to go, and we're going to have hockey back in less than a month. So I want to get into going over all of the new things in this video. There's a lot to talk about, a lot of changes this year, obviously because of the pandemic. But before I begin, I just ask that you please subscribe and hit that like button. Both of those things help out so much and are greatly appreciated. But let's not take any more time here and get right into it. The 2021 NHL season is a go. Let's start here with the basics. So some of the more, just basic outline of what this season is going to look like. 56-game season, starting on January 13th. So they're obviously going to be a condensed schedule. They're cramming a lot of games into a short amount of time. But we know 56 games starting January 13th. Training camps for all NHL teams will begin on January 3rd. So that is only a 10-day training camp and no preseason games either this season. They are jumping right into it, into the regular season. Also of note, the 7 teams that did not make the playoffs last year, they get an extra few days to start training camp. They can begin camp on December 31st if they wish. There's a new divisional alignment this year, and we'll go into detail in that later in this video, and there are no conferences. So East and West is not a thing for this season. It's just 4 divisions, and there's new divisional alignment that we'll talk about in a few minutes. There's also a new playoff format for this year, which I'll go heavily into detail on later in this video as well. No preseason, like I said. That's obviously something new. Usually teams have 5-6 preseason games to kind of get ready to go for the year. That is not the case this year. There's also expanded rosters, or sort of expanded rosters, with the new taxi squad, which I will talk about in detail as well later in this video. Only divisional play until the semifinals and finals in the playoffs. In the regular season, teams will only play within their division, and the first 2 rounds of the playoffs will also be within division as well until we get a final 4 with 1 team coming from each division in the playoffs, and then that's how the semifinals will be played, and then the finals will be the winners of, obviously, the semifinals. Players can opt out with no pay, so if you don't want to play, you can tell your team that you're not playing this season, but you will not get paid, and your contract year will roll over into next season if you opt out for what's deemed not a valid medical reason. If you just don't want to play, you can opt out, but obviously at the detriment of the player. They won't be paid, and their contract year rolls over into next season. So if you had a year left on your contract, you would not be a free agent at the end of the season. You would still have to play next season with your current team. Now, that's if you just opt out because you want to. If it's health related and doctors deem that you or an immediate family member are at risk if you were to contract COVID, and there's real legitimate medical reasons that you should not play, you can opt out of this season, and you will be paid a stipend. It will not be your full normal salary, but you will be paid a stipend. And I do not believe that the contract rollover would go into play either. You would be allowed to opt out, and given, medical reasons for doing so. Next, I want to talk about some key dates. Some key dates this year that everyone should know. December 31st, all the 2020 non-playoff teams can begin training camp. So like I said, most teams begin on January 3rd. That's the next key date. but for the non-playoff teams, they can begin a few days earlier. January 13th, the 2021 season begins. We will have regular season hockey starting on January 13th, and it's going to be a crazy ride through this season with a very condensed schedule. April 12th is the trade deadline. That's always a big fun day and as far as the NHL season is concerned. And we know that it's going to be mid-April this year on April 12th. On May 8th, the regular season will end. So the end of the 56-game season will come on May 8th. On July 21st, the Seattle expansion draft. So the playoffs will begin in May, and the Stanley Cup will be awarded by the middle of July. And then right into the offseason, July 21st will be the Seattle expansion draft. The regular 2021 NHL draft will be July 23rd and 24th. Free agency will open July 28th, and that will be the free agent frenzy of all the guys, finding new teams. And then the 2021-22 season should be back to a normal time frame, full 82 games. Hopefully we're past this whole pandemic and corona thing by then, and the season will be normal. It'll be back to normal divisions. It will be back to hopefully a full 82 games and starting in October, like back to how it was pre-COVID. So that's at least the plan right now. And hopefully going to happen with the vaccine by this summer being mass available to everyone, and really get this thing under control and get life back to normal by hopefully mid-2021. Now I want to talk about the taxi squad, because this is something that is completely new and only for this season, and this is a roster change here, which Cap Friendly actually put out a great tweet yesterday really explaining all of the important points of the taxi squad. So if you want to check that out, I very much suggest going to Cap Friendly's Twitter page and looking at that tweet that they put out. The basic details that you get from that are the taxi squad will be 4 to 6 players, and these players are not on the active NHL roster, but they're not in the minors either. They have to be designated to the taxi squad, and what can happen is if a player on the active roster is unfit to play, gets hurt, or happens to get sick, players can be immediately shifted from the taxi squad to the active roster and can play in place of that player from the active roster who is unfit to play. Waivers will be required if they would normally be required to send to the AHL. So if a player would normally have to go through waivers to get sent to the AHL, they will have to be waived and go through waivers to be put on the taxi squad because it is not on the active roster. Recalls for NHL games from the taxi squad to the active roster must be done before 5 p.m. Eastern time, except in the situation of goaltenders. Something could happen in warm-ups or a goaltender gets sick late. You have to have 2 goalies. So if you need an emergency recall of a goaltender, it does not have to be before 5 p.m. You can get a new goalie at pretty much any time before the game starts, and bring that player from the taxi squad to the active roster. 1 goalie is required, so one of those 4 to 6 players needs to be a goaltender unless you have 3 goaltenders on the active roster. Now, most teams don't do that. They do 2 goaltenders and then 21 skaters to fill out the 23-man active roster. So most teams will probably have 1 goaltender as part of their taxi squad. But basically, the goal for the NHL this season is to have 3 goaltenders available at all times in case something does happen. And you won't have to go to an emergency goaltender like we saw with the David Ayers situation last year. You would have a 3rd goalie who would be able to be immediately recalled and play in the game. And the last day of training camp is when the taxi squad will begin. So you can begin assigning players to the taxi squad the last day of training camp. And then obviously they'll want to fill out their taxi squad either that day or over the next couple of days before the season begins. And the taxi squad will dissolve when the season ends. This is just a 1-year roster thing because of the pandemic and needing to have some extra players available without the travel of going from the AHL team to the NHL team. The taxi squad members can practice with the NHL team. They can join all team activities, and they can travel with the team. It's not required, but they can travel with the team. And I think most will travel with the team, obviously for road trips and such, if to be available on very short notice if need be to play in any sort of game. So they're basically a part of the NHL team without being on the active roster and have to be recalled from the taxi squad to the active roster to play in a game, but to practice and do team activities and stuff like that, they're already available to do that. What they cannot do is join AHL activities or practices or obviously play in the AHL. So that's where I think you're going to see a lot of teams go with veteran players on the taxi squad, maybe sign some PTO type guys to just real cheap 1-year deals to be on the taxi squad rather than calling up young players to be on it, because they're going to want the young players still playing, and these taxi squad guys probably aren't going to see a lot of ice time or game action unless something does happen where you have a lot of players out of the lineup. If a taxi squad player is unfit to play, whether that's for illness, whether that's for injury, the team can request that they not count against the 4 to 6 players. And then I presume you would be able to add another player to that 4 to 6 while that taxi squad player is unfit to play. The cap hit is equivalent to burying them in the minors. So as far as salary cap goes, that's how it's going to work. So it would be like taking an NHL player and putting them in the minors, and that's how it will count against the salary cap. So it will count as a cap hit. The taxi squad players will count against the cap, but it won't be a full cap hit. It will be like sending them to the minors. Injuries to taxi squad players will be treated like they were injured in the minors. I'm not sure exactly the importance of that. I think it will be mostly cap-wise, but that was a thing noted on the cap-friendly tweet. And one-way contracts, players will be paid the standard NHL salary. So if you're on a one-way deal and you're assigned to the taxi squad, you will be paid whatever you would be paid for an NHL salary that year. And if you're on a two-way contract, you will be paid whatever your minor's salary would be if you're put on the taxi squad. So those are guys that have a NHL salary of maybe $750,000, but an AHL salary of $200,000, and they're on a two-way contract. They would be paid the $200,000 that they would have gotten had they be sent to the AHL. Next up thing I want to talk about is the divisional alignment, because that is new. And we'll look at a picture here. All the divisions outlined here. We have the North Division, which is all of the Canadian teams. And we've heard a lot about the Canadian division, and that's been talked about a lot already. Calgary, Edmonton, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver, Winnipeg. The 7 Canadian teams will all be playing in the same division this year, and that is because the border is closed. So the NHL could not have teams going from the U.S. to Canada and Canada to the U.S. The border is closed because of this pandemic. So all the Canadian teams are going to play in the same division amongst each other. Then in the United States, we have 3 divisions of 8 teams each. We have the West Division, which has the 3 California teams, Anaheim, San Jose, and LA, along with Vegas and Arizona, being joined by some old Central Division teams, St. Louis, Minnesota, and Colorado. Then we have the new Central Division, which involves a lot of teams that would normally be in the Eastern Conference, but because of the realignment, will be in the Central Division this year. We have Carolina, Columbus, Detroit, Florida, and Tampa Bay, all coming over from the East to play in the same division as Chicago, Dallas, and Nashville. And then we have the East Division, which is mostly the Metro with a couple of Atlantic teams, Boston and Buffalo joining New Jersey, New York Islanders, New York Rangers, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Washington, all in the East Division, which is going to be an absolute juggernaut of a division this year. But that is the new schedule, or the new divisions, schedule's the next thing I'm going to get to. The new divisions for the NHL just for this season, and that brings us now to the schedule, which I want to talk about because this I like a lot. 56 game season, which is the number we've been hearing, only divisional play. So you look at those divisions that I just showed you, teams will only be playing teams within their own division, which I absolutely love. I have been a huge proponent for more interdivisional games and less cross-conference games just in general in the NHL. And now we are getting a full season of only divisional play. The rivalries are going to be hot. It's going to be intense, physical, nasty hockey, just how I want it. And it's going to be so much fun. I cannot wait to see these teams play each other over and over and over again. As far as the schedule goes, the East, Central, and West divisions, which all have 8 teams in them, those other 7 teams will play each other or each team will play the other 7 teams 8 times over the course of the season. And obviously 8 times 7 is 56. There's your regular season. Now the North Division, the Canadian Division, only has 7 teams in it. So those teams will play the other 6 teams 9 or 10 times over the course of the regular season to get to those 56 games. Obviously, they'll have to play a couple of teams 10 times and the rest of the teams 9 times to hit 56 games. Now the playoffs. How are the playoffs going to work? It's a totally new playoff structure this season. The top 4 teams from each division will make the postseason. And then the first 2 rounds of the playoffs will be intra-divisional as well, which means first place and 4th place will play each other in the first round within the division. 2nd place and 3rd place will play each other. And then in the second round of the playoffs, the 2 winners from the first round playoff series within the division will play the other winner within the division to basically give us a divisional winner, which will then move on to the Final Four, which will be the semifinals. And that is the first time that we will see teams from different divisions playing each other at all this season. Will be in the semifinals. And again, it's not East versus West or anything like that because there are no conferences this year. It will be based on regular season points. So the Final Four will be reseeded based on regular season points, and then 1 will play 4, 2 will play 3, and then the winners of those playoff series, which will all be 7-game series this year. We're back to 16 teams making the playoffs, 7-game series all the way through, which is how it should be. Will play each other in the Stanley Cup Finals. So we could see a very interesting matchup in the Stanley Cup Finals this season. It's very possible that we see 2 teams that are normally in the Eastern Conference and would have no chance of playing each other meet up in the finals. We could see 2 Western Conference teams or normal Western Conference teams that aren't, Western Conference this year because of no conferences meet up in the finals. We could see a team that's normally in the same division end up playing Tampa Bay has moved from the Atlantic to the Central for this year. Tampa Bay could end up playing a team like Boston or Toronto that they're normally in the same division with. They could play them in the Stanley Cup Finals because they're in different divisions this season. So very, very different playoff format this year. No wild cards. Just totally based on divisions down to the Final Four, and then the winner from each division will play in the semifinals, and the 2 winners from the semifinals will play in the finals. It's going to be really, really interesting and a whole lot of fun. And again, we're going to see a lot of the same teams playing each other over and over and over this season, not only in the regular season, but also in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. It's going to lead to super rivalries and really physical hockey, which I absolutely cannot wait for. And like I said, I've been a huge proponent of interdivisional play being more of a focal point in the NHL to begin with. Throw away the cross-conference stuff. Obviously, the NHL wants each team playing each other at least once in a normal regular season, but the cross-conference games do nothing for me. I want to see more divisional play in a regular NHL season, and for this season, we're getting only divisional play, which I absolutely love. And that leaves us to one final question, the biggest question. There's more than one question remaining. There's still a lot of questions, but the big question left in the NHL right now is where will the Canadian teams play? Obviously, the goal is for the NHL is for every team to be playing in their home arena. Obviously, most teams aren't going to have fans, although some southern United States teams have already said that they will allow fans. Dallas and I believe Florida have said that fans will be allowed in at least limited capacity. And I think as the season goes on, you might see more and more teams start to allow a limited number of fans into the building. Some teams you may not. I think California would. They've been so strict and shut down in California. I don't think you're going to see fans at California team games. And Canada has been, very shut down as well, so you probably won't see fans there. But some of the places down in the southern U.S. and throughout the U.S., the Midwest as well, I think as the season goes on, is going to start to allow fans. But the big question remaining is where will the Canadian teams play? Because right now, British Columbia seems to be giving the NHL a little bit of trouble about allowing the Canucks to play in Vancouver. And other provinces as well. Apparently, Ontario and Quebec have not signed off on their teams playing in their home arenas either. So that would affect Toronto and Ottawa in Ontario, in Montreal and Quebec. They haven't been signed off on either yet. So that's a big question still lingering over this whole thing. And the Canadian teams could end up having to do a hub city bubble type situation, or end up being pulled to the U.S. and play somewhere in the U.S. But that's still something that is currently being worked on by the NHL with Canadian health authorities. And another thing is the San Jose Sharks, at least for the start of the season, will not be having training camp and will not be able to play in San Jose. They have already announced that they will be playing in Arizona. California, very, very stringent on the COVID things. The county, Santa Clara County, that the Sharks play in, have a ban on contact sports all the way through January 8th in place. So they will not be able to play there, at least to start the year. But Arizona, much more lenient on COVID protocols. They're happy to have the Sharks, and they obviously have the Coyotes there as well. So the Sharks are just going to move one state over to Arizona and be able to play there to start the season. But in Canada, it's affecting a lot more teams, which is going to be really, really interesting. To see what happens with Vancouver, and if any other provinces are going to be as strict as British Columbia appears to be right now and won't let their teams play. But that's something that still needs to be worked out by the league and health officials. So that's a lot. I know this has been a very, very long video, guys, but I wanted to go over everything as much as I could of what we know now with the NHL's return to play. And that is all the information that I'm aware of right now that's really important heading into this season. And hopefully, I know this video went long, but hopefully you guys stuck around. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon merchandise store and donation link are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.